called me up and said they're going to go all electric by 2035. Every other company has signed up to do the same thing. So we're working with the auto industry to transition to electric vehicle future.
This is my first video update coming to you from what was a cold and rainy Athens, Greece, but now early afternoon, the sun is coming out and it is warming up a bit. But let's not talk about the weather, let's talk about the news. And you saw the opening video segment of Joe Biden. I believe he was speaking at some midterm election event, or perhaps he was at General Motors. I'm not quite sure, but Joe Biden says that General Motors cars will be fully electric by 2035. 1,000 years away, and General Motors will have fully electric cars. All of the cars will be electric. And you know what that means? Once General Motors, once all their cars are electric, I imagine every car will be electric by 3035. And Russia, Saudi Arabia, OPEC Plus, well, they'll lose the oil market, won't they? They'll lose a big part of oil revenues. And that would mean that by 2035, Russia, they will not have the money, the revenue from oil to continue to finance their war machine. And the Putin government will finally collapse. It's only 1,000 years away. So if the collective West, if the people of the collective West would just be a little more patient, just wait 1,000 more years, and Russia will lose a large part of its oil profits, because all the cars will be electric, and Putin will finally be gone. So just a little bit more patience. We just have to put up with inflation and the energy crisis and the cost of living just for another 1,000 more years. And then everything's going to be fine. It's all going to be fine. So this thing caught my attention. Whatever. It's a tree, I guess. Or someone stuck it there. I'm not quite sure. But very, very interesting. All right. Let's talk about, on a serious note, let's talk about two articles that came out the past couple of days. One is from the Washington Post. The other one is from the New York Times. Let's talk about the Washington Post article. And they are saying the CIA, Jeff Bezos-owned Washington Post is saying that the Biden White House, they are encouraging Ukraine President Elensky to publicly, and this is the important part, to publicly come out and say that he is ready to negotiate with Russian President Putin. Now that's what the Biden White House would like Elensky to say publicly. Privately, the Washington Post article is saying that the Biden White House does not want Elensky to negotiate with Putin, but publicly they would like Elensky to come out and say that he is okay for negotiations with the Russian president, because according to this article, many of Washington's wannabe allies, their wannabe allies, are a little turned off by the Elensky rhetoric, where he continually says that he will never talk with the Russian president. He will never search for a negotiation or ceasefire until Vladimir Putin is replaced or there's some sort of regime change. And the Biden White House is saying that many of their allies and their wannabe allies, say India, Turkey, all of the world really outside of the European Union, that they don't like it when Elensky talks about regime change in Russia, and those are the only terms that he will accept in order to open up some sort of dialogue with Russia. And so what the Washington Post is saying, and what the Biden White House is saying, according to this Post article, if you believe it, is that they would like Elensky to act, to pretend, to come out and say that he's cool with Vladimir Putin. He's cool to sit down with Vladimir Putin, but behind the scenes, there's no negotiating with Russia or Putin. They still want regime change. That's what the Post article is saying, and I guess the thinking is that the rest of the world outside of the European Union, all the leaders in Africa and South America and Asia, Turkey, India, Brazil, all of these countries that have remained neutral or have supported Russia. They've remained allies of Russia. For example, the BRICS. All these countries will be completely fooled by Elensky's acting. Elensky's going to say that he wants to speak with Putin, and these countries are going to be like, there you go, Russia. You see, Zelensky wants to negotiate, and so we're ditching you, Putin, and we're now going to side with Biden because Elensky is telling us that he's ready for negotiations. That's, I guess, the thinking there is that all of these countries are going to be duped by Elensky's acting. All right, if they believe that, that's fine. So I just find this such a bizarre article. It kind of defeats the purpose, doesn't it? To come out with an article that claims the Biden White House is encouraging Elensky to say that he would like to negotiate with Russia, but behind the scenes, the White House is telling Elensky never negotiate with Russia, but just say that you're going to negotiate with Russia so that you can fool the rest of the world into believing that you're ready to negotiate with Russia, so that then we can approach the rest of the world and get them on our side and isolate Russia. Anyway, that's the Washington Post article. The New York Times article, they're saying that Kiev is planning, or at least they have a plan in place, to evacuate 3 million residents because of the drone and missile strikes and of a potential collapse in the electric grid. And the New York Times is saying that Ukrainian authorities, they understand that if these drones and missile strikes continue, then the entire electric grid in Kiev is going to completely kaput, and they're going to need to do something, because you're not only talking about no electricity, we're talking about no communications, no water, no sewage, none of that stuff. And so they're preparing for a mass evacuation. This is according to the New York Times. Now, my question is, evacuate to where? Where are you going to evacuate 3 million people to? Because if Russia takes out the electric grid in Kiev, well, I imagine the electric grid is going to be pretty much destroyed in every major city in Ukraine. I imagine all over Ukraine you're going to have a blackout. And so where do all of these people go? Where do you evacuate 3 million plus? Because you've got to talk about evacuating people from Lviv and from Odessa, all of these cities and all the villages. Where do you take them? I don't know. I think there's only one route for all of these people to go, and that's the EU. Poland, Romania, Slovakia, Germany, Hungary. That's where you evacuate them to. That's where they go. We're talking a migrant crisis, a refugee crisis that dwarfs what happened in Syria. When was it? 2015. you're talking about something that could make 2015 look tiny in comparison. But where else do you evacuate these people to? There's nowhere else that you can really take them, other than to the bordering countries of the West. Moldova, perhaps. But Moldova has its own energy crisis. And so this is why I believe Europe, the EU, is going to do everything in their power. We're talking all the money they have, everything that they can do to keep the lights on in Ukraine. And they don't have much. The EU is not going to be able to keep the lights on for much longer if Russia continues to hammer away at the electric grid. The EU is going to try. They're going to send money. They're going to send equipment. They're going to try to keep the substations working. They're going to try to repair these stations. They said they're going to send blankets and electric heaters. They're going to try to do everything they can to make sure that the electric grid doesn't collapse, because if it collapses, then you're going to have a big problem in the European Union that could eventually lead to the collapse of the European Union itself. In 2015, the EU was in very bad shape with the migrant crisis. Can you imagine 10, 15, 20 million migrants flooding over to the European Union? It'd be a catastrophe, an absolute catastrophe. So that's the situation there. That's the New York Times article. And while we're on the subject of Ukraine, Jake the Snake Sullivan, Biden's chief foreign policy guy, he's the man that makes all the decisions for the United States of America when it comes to foreign policy. Well, he made a surprise visit to Kiev. He decided to visit Elensky and bring 400 million. He brought 400 million in weapons. And on the record, his trip was all about the U.S. reaffirming their support. I don't even know where I want to go. Let's go into the woods. Let's go this way into the woods. On the record, this was all about reaffirming the United States' support for Ukraine. And of course, delivering 400 million in weapons, which, from what I understand, are all the weapons that the U.S. military does not want or cannot use. It's all the remaining, like old, say, Soviet-style weapons, or weapons that the U.S. is just not. They're just sitting there collecting dust, and they just want to kind of unload them on Ukraine. But I'll put a link down below to Brian Berletic, the new Atlas, to his video where he actually gets into the details of this 400 million weapons package that Sullivan announced while he was in Kiev. Anyway, that's what we're all supposed to believe was the real reason of this visit to Kiev. But off the record, this is why I believe Sullivan went to Kiev. I think that he went to Kiev in order to get this Kherson offensive moving. Plain and simple. Now, I don't think that he wants this Kherson offensive to start right away so that the United States could somehow get something going before Tuesday, the midterm elections. I don't think that's the reason. I think that Sullivan wants the Kherson offensive to start, even if the weather is bad, even knowing that the Russians are dug in. They've brought in reinforcements. They're well prepared. I think Sullivan doesn't care about any of that. He just wants the offensive to start because he would like to have some sort of action taking place in Kherson for the time between the midterms and when the new Congress, the House and the Senate, come into session. He wants those 2 months to be kinetic, to have Ukraine moving, advancing. He wants talking points. He wants media spin. He wants Ukraine capturing villages. He wants all of this to go down in the 2 months between the midterms and the new Congress, because the Biden White House, they want to make sure that they tie up the new Congress into the Ukraine project. They don't want anyone in the new Congress. They don't even want to risk it. They don't want any risk that some sort of coalition, an America First coalition in the new House and the Senate, will think about cutting funding to Ukraine or delaying funding or delaying weapons deliveries or something like that. Sullivan doesn't want any of that. So he wants to make sure, in my opinion, he wants to make sure that things are going off in Ukraine. And none of this 3-4 week stasis. He doesn't want any lulls. He wants Elensky to go into Kherson, even if it means annihilation. Because in his mind, I believe, in his mind, he can then say, well, the Ukraine military is having a rough time in Kherson. The Russian military, they're distracted or engaged in this battle in Kherson. So we've got 40,000 American troops, along with 30,000 Polish troops and 20,000 Romanian troops. We've got this little coalition of the willing, right, that we've put in place. Let's go in. Let's go in and let's create a fait accompli, as they say. Let's change the dynamics on the ground as the Russians are fighting in Kherson. Let's change the dynamics in the west of Ukraine and make things difficult for Russia. Let's move in NATO and create a dynamic where the Russians have to make a very difficult decision: annihilate the NATO troops or back off and accept an American, Polish, Romanian presence in the west of Ukraine. And I think the neocons believe that Russia's going to back off. I think they're once again drinking their own Kool-Aid in believing that Putin doesn't have the stomach for this conflict, believing that Russia's running out of missiles, that the Russian military is weak, that the Ukraine military fought them off in the siege of Kiev, and all of these things. I think they're drinking their own Kool-Aid, and they believe that if they create the dynamics in Kherson, they create some movement in Kherson, then they can get NATO into the West, and they can create the dynamics then for a U.S. military presence. Like what Brian at the New Atlas says, they can create this buffer zone, what they've done in Syria. That's what they believe, in my opinion, and that may be what Sullivan is trying to cook up. So he wants Kherson moving. Everything hinges on Kherson. Let's get Kherson moving. Let's tie everyone's hands in the House, in the Senate. It doesn't matter if they're Republican. It doesn't matter if they're Democrats, whether they're MAGA, or whether they're progressives, wannabe progressives, whatever. It doesn't matter. We're going to create the dynamics. So everyone has to be on board with the Ukraine project, with supporting our troops in Ukraine, with NATO being in Ukraine. And, of course, the American public is going to have to buy into it as well, because, you know, you're talking about American troops, NATO troops moving into Ukraine, right? Because you can't have the Elensky regime collapse in the Battle of Kherson, can you? And, of course, Sullivan may be thinking that would be the backup plan. Maybe if everything goes well, then Elensky does take Kherson City. And if that's the case, well, then I can come out and say it's a victory. Look at how well they're doing. And so the Congress is going to continue to funnel money into Ukraine because Elensky is making headway. I think that's what this whole trip to Kiev was about. They're planning everything out, at least in their minds. They're planning everything out. And by the way, you know, the New York Times is saying that Kiev is about to evacuate, right? And you're going to have a collapse of the electric grid and a permanent blackout situation. But at the same time, you have Sullivan traveling to Kiev. You had the Greek president. She was in Kiev. You had the German president. He was in Kiev a couple weeks ago. David Letterman was doing an interview in Kiev. So while you have this narrative of a blackout and an evacuation, and of Russian missiles and drones dismantling the electric grid, the water, the sewage, the communications, you have all of these important politicians and wannabe, once upon a time, important entertainers traveling to Kiev. How does that work? How does that work? Are they not worried about going to Kiev? I would imagine that the US government would tell Sullivan, it's probably not safe to travel to Kiev at this moment because the city's being torn apart. But no, nope. They're traveling to Kiev to meet with Elensky. Unless, of course, I don't know, maybe they're not going to Kiev and maybe Elensky is in Kiev. I don't know. Who am I to know? I have no idea. So let's see here. Those were the two big stories that caused a lot of discussion over the past couple of days. And what else should we talk about? How about Iran? So Biden, when he was in San Diego on a campaign event, he said something along the lines of, we're going to free Iran, something like that. We're going to liberate Iran and we're going to give Iran freedom. And then the Iranian authorities, they came out to Biden and they said, you know what, we've already won our freedom. It was called the Islamic Revolution, and we won it from you guys, right? We became free from you guys and the monarchy. And then Iran came out with a statement, and they said that this whole drone thing that you guys keep going on and on about, well, we have very good relations with Russia. This is the foreign ministry of Iran. We have neighborly relations with Russia, and we've never provided them with missiles, but it is true that we did provide them with some drones in the beginning of the SMO. And when Iran said that, Elensky and his advisor, what's his name, Michael Podolyak, they jumped on the Biden rhetoric, but then they jumped on what the foreign ministry of Iran said, and they said that Ukraine reserves the right to take out the facilities where the Iranian drones are manufactured, i.e., Ukraine can send missiles over to Iran to destroy the drone facilities. I don't think Ukraine has those missiles, but I don't think they have the Ukrainian missiles have that range. That's for sure. But those were the comments coming out of Podolyak and Elensky the other day with regards to Iran. And so I just think the whole Iran drone thing, I just think the Iranians, they gave the Russians drones in the beginning of the SMO, and then they gave the Russians the blueprints, the engineering specs, everything to manufacture those drones, and then the Russians just got to it. That was it. That's what I think happened. But Elensky, he's freaking out. I mean, he really freaked out. And he's like, we're going to hit Iran and we're going to send missiles to those facilities. And Podolyak said the same thing. And yeah, those were the statements from Elensky. He's going to open up a second front towards Iran, right? A two-front conflict. One against the Russians and then another one against Iran. Anyway, oh boy. So this is the Zapio. You guys want to walk in? There's some sort of event here. It's a free entrance. It's like a healthcare event, but you rarely get to come in here. This is where Greece signed away its future and joined the European Union. I was in this building, and this building was actually from what I understand, it was where when we had the first Olympics in 1896. This was where the athletes stayed, and this is where they had various events and stuff like that. It was in this building, this area. So, and now it's like a convention hall. They have conventions and stuff like that here every now and then. All right. So, we talked about Iran. Good. I wanted to talk about that story because I think it's an interesting story. Then you have the whole side story of some sort of conflict between Saudi Arabia and Iran, and that whole thing where, that's just propaganda. That's just BS that's being thrown out there by the U.S. and the collective West, because they want Saudi Arabia and Iran to fight. They don't want those two countries working together. That's the last thing they want, and they're getting spooked at the talk about Iran and Saudi Arabia entering BRICS and the SCO and all of these things, and the collective West. They're trying to fabricate some sort of terror attack or potential terror attack because they want to divide Saudi Arabia and Iran. That's like a whole nother story right there. But let's discuss now. I could talk about this UN vote that the Russians brought up. I have to be careful with the words that I use, the NAZI vote. So the Russians brought up a while back, I don't know, maybe like a couple of years ago, if I'm not mistaken, the Russians, they brought up to the UN a vote for the UN, for all the member states of the UN to condemn NAZIs. And at that time, all the countries voted, yes, we condemn it, except for two countries, Ukraine and the United States. This was like, I think maybe, I want to say 2 to 4 years ago. So two countries voted against this resolution that Russia put on the table. Every other country in the world said, no, we condemn this. And Russia brought up the same resolution. They tabled the same resolution. And this time around, you had, let me get the numbers here, 105 countries voted in support of this resolution, of adopting this resolution, condemning NAZIs. And 52 countries voted against it, with 15 countries abstaining. You went from 2 countries, the United States and Ukraine, voting against this, to 50 countries now voting against this. 50 countries in the world and 15 abstaining. 50 countries don't want to condemn this ideology. So I thought that was an interesting story. Give it a look. Look it up, and I think it's an interesting development at the United Nations. Just goes to show where we are at this moment in history. Before I do a clown world, let's do a kind of pre-clown world. A pre-clown world. This one has to do with NATO. NATO. The talk is that the new NATO Secretary General is going to be Freeland. So here we have an exhibition for honey, the 6th exhibition for honey. And a lot of honey. Greece has the best honey in the world, I think. And so you have some of the best honey producers in the world here, because we make good honey. Fantastic. It smells nice here, by the way. So, Freeland, who's the ruler of Canada, the real ruler of Canada, and she has ties to this group that the UN was debating about. She has historic ties to them, family ties, let's say. Well, she's being touted as the next Secretary General of the United Nations. What is she now? She's the finance minister in Canada. She's like the right hand of Trudeau, the finance minister of Canada. She was the one that threatened the truckers that their accounts would be confiscated during the protests if they continue. That's her. She's going to be the next, well, allegedly, the New York Times is pushing for her to be the next Secretary General in NATO. And why not? Why not? I actually think it's quite fitting. I think it brings everything full circle, doesn't it? For Chrystia Freeland to head up NATO. That's what I believe. I think the story is writing itself. The story is writing itself. NATO mission creep in Ukraine. They want to get involved. Russia is fighting against a NATO proxy. God forbid, Russia may be fighting against NATO itself. God forbid. I hope that doesn't happen, but it's a possibility at this moment in time. And Stoltenberg is on his way out. And who do you bring in? Chrystia Freeland. And look up her family history. I don't really need to say much, or people in Canada in the comments down below, I'm sure they'll let everybody know about Chrystia Freeland. But it makes perfect sense in this story for her to take over. And she was like a journalist. She's not a military expert. She's never she knows nothing about the military or anything like that. I don't even think she's a finance expert. She was a journalist. She lived some time in Russia. And sure.
Yes. Where are you from?
I'm from here. But I'm making a video where a lot of people from outside of here are going to see it.
You are Greek. You are Greek.
Yes, but we got to speak English for the video. Tell me about your company. Actually, let me get a shot of this.
Mount Athos.
Mount Athos.
Πρεσβυτική.
Τέλεια. Mount Athos honey. Do you have a website? Gold. A gold award?
Yes.
You don't mind if I put this on video to share with everybody?
No problem.
Okay, Mount Athos. The honey is fantastic. And what is the website?
There is the golden. The golden words.
The Golden? The Golden Awards.
Gold.
Wow. The best honey is in Greece, huh?
Yes.
Ωραία. The internet. Where can people find you so they can buy the honey?
Athos Gis.
Athosgis.com.
Ναι. Athos Gis 4. Είναι το email μας.
Gmail.com.
Gmail.com.
Yes.
Ωραία. I'm going to tell people to find you there. Athosgis, gmail.com.
Athos Gis 4.
Desera. Perfect. All right. Ευχαριστώ πάρα πολύ. All right. That was really good. Really tasty honey. Wow. Athosgis. Okay, here we go. Athosgis.gr. Guys, if you want to get some of the best honey in the world, go to athosgis.gr. So I was talking about Chrystia Freeland. Nothing sweet about her. Nothing sweet about her. Yeah, she's completely unqualified to head up NATO. But you know, when is it ever stopped them? Anyway, I want to do a clown world, and I'm going to need to free up my hands here to do this clown world because this has to do with the Daily Mail article. And I'm going to need to put that there. Let me put this brochure in my pocket. I'll put a link to this honey down below in the description box. So if you want to get some honey, order from them. He was a nice guy, nice couple. Let's talk about Clown World now. And we got to talk about this Daily Mail article. And this one's pretty incredible. This one is pretty incredible. Let's see here. The Daily Mail and a zoo in Ukraine. Here we go. The animals are suffering shell shock at a Ukrainian zoo after being traumatized by war. Actually, let's walk up this way, where it's a little more quiet. So this article from the Daily Mail, just when you thought the Daily Mail couldn't get any more trashy, any more ridiculous, any more stupid, they lower the bar even more, right? They've surprised me with this one. So they're saying here that animals in a zoo in Ukraine, the Mysyatsev Zoo in Demidov, right on the outskirts of Kiev. Well, the animals in this zoo are traumatized from the Russian invasion. Let's see here. Vladimir Putin's ruthless invasion of Ukraine has seen families ripped apart, homes blown to smithereens, and children savagely killed as part of his indiscriminate bombing campaign. But other forgotten victims of the war have been left to suffer in bleak conditions as missiles rain down around their cold enclosures. The animals of the Mysyatsev Zoo in Demidov on the outskirts of Kiev have remained in their pens throughout the brutal conflict, now in its 9th month. Many have been left traumatized from the nearby shelling in the early days of the war, when Kremlin troops marched on the capital before they were forced into a humiliating retreat. They had to get that Siege of Kiev humiliating retreat line in there. They had to get all those lines in there, right? Putin is evil, Putin is doing this. They had to get all of that in there. So that's one of the reasons that they put out this story, is so that they can just... It's just repackaging the usual propaganda, but now it's in a different form. Now it's repackaged to talk about a zoo, but you're going to talk about the Siege of Kiev and the Ghost of Kiev and the Zaporozhye Avenger and Putin's evil and he's a dictator and all these things. You got to get all those into an article. And so, they figured, we've talked about all of these things. We've talked about these cities and these villages and these people. Why not talk about animals now? And when we can fit all of this propaganda that way, we could fit it in that way. And so that's one of the reasons why they put out this article. But another reason why they put out an article like this, and this is the sinister reason for them to put out an article like this, this is the evil reason for them to do this, is because they want to paint Russians as evil. They want to demonize them, right? Because they could be going to war with Russia, so they want to make Russians less than human. They want to remove their humanity. And what better way to remove a country, a culture, a people's humanity than to say that, they hate animals, they attack animals. Actually, in this article, it even says that the Russian soldiers would eat the animals in the zoo. Not a joke. Let me find the paragraph. Let me find the place here. It's towards the bottom, where they talk about how the Russian troops would eat the animals. The rescue workers arrived 10 days later to find animal skeletons and pieces of flesh and bone scattered across the zoo grounds. Okay, so they're talking about Russia's humiliating retreat, right? They frame it that way. So the Russians, they face this humiliating retreat, and so the rescue workers come in. According to the authorities, 2 camels, a kangaroo, a bison, some piglets, birds, and wolves were killed. Those animals that were saved are being cared for in the city of Dnipro. So yeah, and they actually have photos of they try to put photos in there of the animals in distress, or you could tell by the photography. Let me put up one photo of this rhinoceros, and the byline says, "A lonely rhinoceros rubs its horns against a metal gate at the zoo yesterday, more than 8 months after Russia's invasion of Ukraine." And here's another photo. A zoo worker pets capybaras 7 at Mysyatsev Zoo as forlorn animals face cold winter months ahead with no visitors at the zoo. And so you can see what they're doing here, right? They're removing Russia's humanity. They're painting Russians as evil animal killers and animal eaters. This is why the UK has to do what they're doing. This is why NATO has to go to war with Russia and everything else. Right? There you have it. is actually a very sinister article, a very sinister piece of propaganda. But the good news about this article is that I went into the comments sections. And when I went into the comments, first of all, there weren't many comments, which I found interesting. But when I did read the comments, I would say that 95% of all the comments with this article realized that it was BS. And what did all the commenters say? They said the real tragedy is keeping animals in a zoo. Free the animals. Animals should not be locked up. Period. That was what all the comments were saying. So people realized that this was a piece of despicable and ridiculous propaganda. And people said it's time to free the animals. They should not be locked up. They should be allowed to live in their natural habitat. That was the comment section of this Daily Mail article. Anyway, that is the video, guys. This was a nice walk on this Sunday afternoon. theduran.locals.com. We are also on Rockfin as well. And look for the Duran's videos on all of the video platforms, including Telegram. And look for Alexander's videos on all the video platforms, including Telegram. And go to the Duran shop, 10% off. Use the code GOODDAY. Take care.